Hi there, and I've managed to grab Nick Ayton, who's a very busy man. So, as usual, this is going to be very brief. But Nick, if you wouldn't mind, quickly give us a bit of your background.
Well, I'm a bit of a tech geek, stroke entrepreneur, stroke business person. I've been around a long time. I've had multiple startups. I've had some corporate roles, but most recently I've ended up in the blockchain world. So.
Well, I was going to ask, how did you get here?
Well, I guess it's like a lot of people. You have a sort of an epiphany when you read the literature and you listen to the conversations and the guys that were around who started off the Bitcoin revolution, if you like. It becomes infectious. And when you start reading about what's really going on and what the technology can do, it becomes obsessive, and you end up, every sleeping hour, is mulling over in your head, the potential of the technology.
And of course, because you've already seen cycles come through of this technology, not blockchain, obviously, but the secular nature of business, I suppose. And then when a new tech comes on the scene, I suppose even for somebody like you, it takes a while for the Bitcoin to drop rather than the penny to drop.
Yeah.
And was that the case? I mean, I take it you weren't straight involved in 2009.
Not at all. No. So you're absolutely right. Technology cycles have been going for, since the 50s. I mean, when computing really came of age during the war, and then as it moved into the 60s of massive mainframe computing. Then you had the 70s where it was pre-evolution of the PC, and then the PC hit at the beginning of the 80s. And then, of course, you had the internet revolution in the 90s. So this wave is actually, in a sense, more profound than the previous waves. And in a sense, more unpredictable, and it's happening quicker. And there's a number of reasons for that.
Right. And I suppose you'd be an ideal person then to ask of the potential for where it could take us. I mean, listen, you're a businessman. The workplace, for instance, what do you see happening there?
Well, if you think about the nature of work and how organisations are set up and how they're managed, you haven't really seen a great deal of change for 100 plus years. Since coming out of the Industrial Revolution in the Victorian era, where there was a massive step forward, you then hit the Henry Ford mass manufacturing world, where it was long production lines. But the nature of work was compartmentalised, so everyone's role was defined around, in those days, standard cost. So if you were fitting a wheel on a Model T Ford, your job would be to lift the rubber wheel, put it on, put 4 bolts, and you'd get a certain amount of time to do that, and there'd be a certain cost associated with that. And all of that was written down on paper ledgers, on standard cost sheets. As you roll forward, what happened in the 60s and the 70s, that computing reflected what was already technically quite a tired model, and they embedded the inefficiencies of that old model, which was very much hierarchy. So power disseminated top down, roles were defined to disempower people because they weren't trusted to make decisions. So you ended up with a zero trust environment, which is what most organisations are. So you have the nature of work itself has been packaged in silos, in functional areas, where if you stray outside of those, you get a slap on the wrist. You're moving into somebody else's job domain. So what happens now is that the blockchain is starting to call that conventional operating model out. And the culprit is something called the system of record, which is a centralized sort of database of information on which all of that standard cost accounting and all of those original recording of people's work and activity ended up in a single centralized database. If you roll that forward to what blockchain is, it's a distributed database where it's very transparent, very visible, and is very open. So everyone can see what's going on, as opposed to the system of record where there's duplicate information, everyone has their own copy. So in an insurance market, for example, you'll have brokers, you'll have the carriers, you'll have a whole range of different intermediaries. They'll each hold a separate version of information, which is mostly inaccurate, incomplete. And the reason they do it is because they don't trust other people's information, and they don't want other people to have access to their information. So what blockchain does is structurally changes the way in which we record and share information. But I also think it takes the brakes off commerce completely. in such a way that you can redefine what an operating model should do, what it should look like, how work itself is going to be packaged up, and how people are going to do that work. So it's a revolution coming. Nobody knows what it looks like. It's an evolution in terms of computer science, because the technology itself has come up with solutions around some fundamental issues that was holding it back. But now they've been solved. So it does mean that you can design, imagine, so putting it this way, if you've got the conventional operating model is a world of zero trust or low trust or no trust. But imagine if I said to you, design me an insurance company in a world where there is absolute trust, absolute reliance on transactions integrity, absolute reliance on things getting done in a certain way. You would probably design the organisation, and the industry itself would look entirely different. And to me, that's the power of this new technology. It's a fundamental shift in the way that you can construct commerce.
Why has it taken us so long? Already, I'm thinking the Bitcoin white paper's now 8 years old, even nearly 9.
At least, yeah.
Why do we think there's either a reluctance by business to kind of grab Bitcoin? Or, I mean, is this an educational problem? Is this a communications problem? Why aren't more companies kind of rushing to it? Or are they? I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, look, the thing about most technologies, especially when there's a big shift, is there is an enormous amount of hype. So everyone piles in. So the technologists, the geeks, they discover something that's amazing. They solve a lot of the problems. The Satoshi paper did solve a lot of fundamental issues. So you get this enormous hype. So all the clever people pile in. And there's always a lag. So the lag will be when business catches up, which is starting to do now. Financial services in particular, this is why we're sitting in sort of Shoreditch on the edge of the city. Financial services has taken the lead. You can ask why. Well, fundamentally, they probably see this technology as a bit of a threat, so they better get involved and understand what it means. But there is a massive lag always as a new technology creates that hype and then reality sets in. I mean, look at the internet. So when the internet came out, you then needed the World Wide Web to create that layer on top that made it usable. But then in the early days, would you have done a credit card transaction on it? No, exactly. So you needed that maturity for another layer of security to come about, which enabled you to have that trust in being able to do transactions. And then once that happened, the internet took off and e-commerce took off massively. The Bitcoin blockchain, or blockchain as everyone tends to refer to it, is going to go through that exact cycle, but it's going to happen quicker this time. So there's lots of people doing things which you can't see. There's lots of people working on use cases across financial services, across supply chain, across insurance. There's consortiums springing up all over the place. And the original open source code has been forked many times, and there's people working on their version of blockchain to try and overcome some of the physical issues that the technology still has, which is principally around scaling. So there's lots of good stuff going, and I think 2017 is a great year because I think you'll see some real stuff come to market. At the moment, there's a lot of prototyping, a lot of proof of concept, but next year I think you should be able to see, feel and touch it and see some proper stuff coming to market.
Great. And just to wrap this up, I mean, you mentioned that you're here in Shoreditch. Are there other companies, are you bumping into people all the time that are kind of in this space? Is that how come you get more of your knowledge?
Well, in a sense, we're here in Shoreditch because of two things really: available resources. I mean, the banks have hoovered up a lot of the resources in the City of London, but there are a lot of fintech, a lot of technology, a lot of innovative startups in this area. So availability to energetic, smart people is important. But at the same time, you're 10 minutes walk from the city. So the City of London is a financial centre. It is important. Anyone worth knowing is often based in London, and of course other financial capitals, Frankfurt, Singapore, New York. But London is a hub, and therefore it's the best location you can get for that combination of people and getting access to the City of London.
Nick, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for your time. I wouldn't mind grabbing you again for another one of these if that's all right with you.
That's perfect.
Great. Cheers.